The 2020-2021 school year was one of the most difficult years for teachers, students, and our school infrastructure. The Connecticut Association of Boards of Education said, Connecticut school districts have made a heroic effort to support their students, whether in person, hybrid, or distance learning. But the pandemic has exacerbated existing inequities. Patrice McCarthy, the Deputy Director and General Counsel for CABE, is with us today to talk about the coming school year, addressing those inequities, and how to best support our students and the future of Connecticut. We'd like to thank our premier sponsor at Digital Back Office, Palo Alto Networks. Check them out at digitalbackoffice.com or paloaltonetworks.com. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state and local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or member municipal leaders. Patrice, thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
So you work for CABE, or the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, which, we all know what boards of education are. That's kind of self-explanatory, but your organization does quite a lot. Can you kind of tell us about the services that you provide and what your role is at CABE?
Absolutely. CABE really provides very similar services to boards of education as CCM provides to municipalities. So we provide education, advocacy, and support. In the education area, we provide a whole host of professional development opportunities to help board members understand not only their roles and responsibilities, but also the current issues impacting education. Of course, during the past year, we've been in a whole era of unprecedented issues and decisions that have to be made. And so we've had a new series of opportunities in order to engage boards, and particularly the chairpersons of boards of education, so that they have an opportunity to get the latest information and also to share and support each other. In the area of advocacy, that takes place at both the state and federal level. And we advocate directly on behalf of boards, but we also help give them the tools that they need in order to be successful advocates. And our support systems are very much individualized, tailored to the needs of individual districts. We provide policy services, publications. We'll do individual workshops for boards, assist them in their self-evaluation process. Really just about anything a board needs in order to be as effective as possible.
Excellent. I know, like with CCM, sometimes you get newly elected and, they're in need of more training, but it sounds like this year, it's not just the new people that are going to need to learn stuff. It's everybody's got a whole lot of new stuff to learn this year.
Absolutely. And we've seen a real eagerness on behalf of our volunteer school board members in order to get the information and have the strategies that they need to provide a meaningful education experience for their students, even though in many cases it's had to look very different than it's ever looked before.
Yeah. So that's right now from the heat, it's summer. But this could be one of the most crucial summers for children and educators in recent memory. We had a year behind us of hybrid, remote, in-person, kind of all over the place with mixed results. What were some of the benefits, and also what were some of the drawbacks this past year of COVID learning?
Well, we certainly saw an incredible effort by our educators, classroom teachers, paraprofessionals, building administrators, superintendents, working with their boards of education to do as much as they could to make this past year a meaningful year of education. Particularly in the area of technology, there was a tremendous effort to make sure that students had the devices that they needed and also had the connectivity. Now, that being said, we know that we still had many students for a variety of reasons who became very disconnected from school. It could be that there were 3 students in a household and a parent working remotely so that their internet access was inadequate to support that family. Or it could be situations where a young teen was needed to help care for younger children in the household while a parent needed to go to work. So we know that even with the best technology available, that there were still real challenges around engagement. We also saw that the social emotional needs of
Hmm.
students, when they were not able to be interacting with their peers and have the support of the adults in the school building, really was impacted. And we're going to have to be
Yeah.
dealing with that, not just over this summer and the next school year, but probably for several years beyond.
Hmm.
So we also saw that the role of schools as community schools, the fact that they are not just places where students go to learn,
Hmm.
but that was really highlighted by the need to continue food service programs when schools were closed, to try and address the health needs of students who
Hmm.
would often rely on their school nurse for many of their health needs.
Yeah, I think that was important for a lot of us to take into account. And I know when I did see, the signs up for, even at the closed schools, there was still food programs going on. They weren't just sitting there, mothballed. There's still things going on in all these schools
Absolutely.
and at home. All sorts of new and confusing things happening last year. So right now, municipalities, boards of ed, and the state are partnering on some programs to help catch kids up. Can you tell us a little bit more about what some best practices are for getting our children back into the swing of things as the new school year approaches? And do you have any good kind of standout examples of programs like that?
There is a tremendous focus on our programming this summer, and many districts have moved very far away from the traditional model of summer school being the opportunity just to recover credits, to develop some specific skills that may
Hmm.
have been lost. And they're really looking at comprehensive programs using some of the very important federal funds that have
Hmm.
come to our school districts, and looking at components that address social emotional wellness, academic needs, as well as students having fun, being able to interact with their peers, being able to interact with positive role models, whether those be high school counselors that are working with these students. So it's, in many districts, it's much more like a camp experience than what we would think of as a traditional summer school program.
Yeah.
And some of the things that we've seen are really amazing. In order to look at individual student interests
Hmm.
and have learning opportunities that engage students, we have the superintendent in Griswold offering a course on Shakespeare because there were a group of students that appealed to. In Naugatuck, they're looking at having on-track coordinators to
Hmm.
help make sure that students, particularly high school students, are moving through with the credits that they will need in order to graduate, and so that there any unfinished learning that has occurred in the past year and a half, that those are addressed so that they do become successful graduates. Um, Newington is looking at reinventing their professional learning committees,
Hmm.
looking at what the support that their staff needs in order to be effective in addressing these extraordinary student needs. And it's really an opportunity for districts to sort of reset where they
Hmm.
are and help students and staff reset and be able to start in September reinvigorated and back into the in-person environment.
Yeah, I think it's interesting talking about some of the more like the Shakespeare program. It's a little bit more fun. And, because I know when I was in school, summer school was spoken of like punishment, basically. It's like,
Right.
if you messed up, you were going to have to go to summer school. But now it's, when you're talking about some of the social, implications of the pandemic, getting, kids re-socialized even through more fun activities sounds like it's more important than it may have been in the past, where it's not just they didn't see each other for a couple months of summer. They may not have seen each other for a full school year and things.
That's right. And there may be lessons that we take away from this summer experience that we apply going forward as well to our summer programs.
Always learning, educators and students alike. So moving forward, there's kind of this question of, closing the digital divide, because as we saw, when this started, there was some places that didn't have the connectivity or the devices as much. But, also there's, the negative sides that we've seen from some of this remote schooling. So how do you balance the possibilities of keeping some online learning capabilities, but without, neglecting that other important side of things?
I I think the importance of the connection between students and their teachers has been really emphasized during these past 16 months. And I think recognizing that technology can enhance a component of the educational system, but it really cannot replicate what happens when students and teachers are together on a regular basis. So, and with teachers available to support a whole variety of student needs, not just academic needs.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM. CABE has the new school year to be planning for. What is the new school year going to look like in Connecticut?
Well, districts are planning to have in-person instruction. They have the capacity to do that for all of their students, but they are also very aware of the need for flexibility, that there is certainly the possibility that health metrics could change, and therefore they have to be able to accommodate a variety of potential scenarios. So over the summer, they've been looking at upgrading their HVAC systems, for example, again, using some of those federal funds, because a healthier school environment is going to be a positive, whether we're in the middle of a pandemic or not. But they also recognize that helping their parent community rebuild that trust, rebuild that sense of security that many families have relied on in their schools for many years. And that has certainly been disrupted in some cases by the health crisis. But the protocols that our districts have used in the past year have been a great example of how to do things in a safe manner, because we have not seen transmission within our schools. So our State Department of Public Health and our State Department of Education have done an outstanding job over the course of the past year. They have had weekly phone calls with up to 1,000 education officials, the statewide organizations, as well as individuals in each school district, giving them the most up-to-date information, answering their questions, and being honest about the things that we didn't know during the course of the developing pandemic.
Yeah, I know. At first, we were all hyper focused on the hand washing, which is, you still wash your hands. It's good. It's clean. But it turns out it was more about the air stuff than it was the hands and the touching.
Exactly.
Checking out your priorities as an organization and getting ready for the show, one of the ones that stood out was an emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion in education. Connecticut might have this image of the progressive northern state, but we actually have some very segregated schools in this state. How did this happen?
Well, we have a long history of housing patterns, transportation patterns, and employment opportunities that really have isolated many aspects of our state. And so that really has then spilled over into the segregation of many of our schools. So we have had longstanding positions urging the state to address those broader issues in order to support the opportunity for a much more diversified education system. CABE has had a committee addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion issues for several years, and they focus not just on the student population issue, but also making efforts to provide a more diverse educator workforce, because that has been an ongoing concern in Connecticut. We are making progress on that issue, but there's much more progress that needs to be made so that students, whether they be students of color or white students, are exposed to teachers from a variety of backgrounds.
Yeah, I think that's important, not only to see themselves represented, but to see other cultures and ideas represented in the education system. In the longer kind of form of the agenda, you mentioned that CABE would like the state to develop new metric to measure schools' racial makeup and provide districts with the resources to achieve greater diversity. What's the benefit of diversity in schooling, and have you seen methods that worked?
Well, certainly having all students exposed to, whether it be staff or peers of different backgrounds and perspectives, helps to build their understanding, helps them to be prepared to function in a global society where they will be interacting with people that come from different backgrounds than their own. And so that exposure at early ages will enhance their ability to be productive global citizens. We certainly, the minority teacher recruitment and retention efforts have yielded some results. We're encouraged that the state legislature has put some support, additional support behind that this year. And one of the most effective tools that we've seen is to provide support to existing school staff who might be serving as paraeducators or in a role in the central office, but they don't hold teacher certification, and providing a program where over the course of 1 year, they can become certified, have support in the building, because these are individuals that are already committed to that school community. They may have been working in that building for 10 years. And so when they become a certified educator, that's where they're going to stay, because that's their community.
I know CABE, like CCM, has made an equity toolkit for your members. What were the goals of your toolkit, and do you have any advocacy efforts planned around it this year?
Well, the real goal is to support boards of education in having these conversations when sometimes these can be difficult conversations in some communities, to help community members understand why diversity is important, why these initiatives are worthy of support, and what the long-term value to the students in that district will be. So that's a piece of the toolkit. The other piece really has to do with helping districts think about ways that they can support educators when they are able to start to diversify their workforce so that they're able to retain those educators, and also to encourage local officials when they're recruiting candidates to serve on boards of education to think about looking for candidates that reflect the diversity of the community and the diversity of the student body. And that's just an important factor for people to be thinking about, to understand what the role of a board is, and also to understand how important it is that, just like having educators that represent a variety of backgrounds, it's important that our local elected bodies represent the community as well.
Yeah, and this kind of leads us into kind of the hot, buzzwords or whatever right now. Critical race theory is all over the place. Now, CABE, along with the State Department of Education, the Association of Public Schools, the American Federation of Teachers, have all defended diversity and equity and inclusion practices as important to culturally responsive education. The first question is, what really is critical race theory? Is it taught in our schools in Connecticut? And what does it have to do with diversity, education, and inclusion programs?
Well, critical race theory is not a curriculum.
Okay.
It's not taught in our schools.
Okay.
And it is actually a legal theory used to analyze how past laws have promoted inequity and what the ongoing impact of those laws are. So one example is redlining in housing, where for many decades, realtors would steer people of color away from certain neighborhoods and steer them towards other neighborhoods. That led to segregation in our communities, and we see today the ongoing effects of that. But it is not, it simply is not a curriculum. What's happened is that the term has really been hijacked and used to promote fear and divisiveness. So it's important that community members and parents understand what actually is being taught, which is the history of our country, the skills that students need in order to analyze history, to develop critical thinking skills, because that's what's going to make them effective as they go on into the workplace.
Yeah. So kind of buzzwords that are being applied to things that aren't really accurate and have been around for a while.
Exactly. The critical race theory was first discussed back in the 1960s.
So kind of equally important is information on LGBT issues. What are our schools doing? What can they be doing to provide the foundation for a more equitable future for our LGBTQ community?
This is an area where school culture really matters.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that there is understanding and respect and civility demonstrated to all of our students so that
Mm-hmm.
they do not feel other or different or less than any of their peers. And that culture that is supportive of all students, but also
Mm-hmm.
educates students about differences, is again what will make them good citizens, good employees as they go forward from their school experience.
Yeah, excellent. I think the talk about how important the culture is with a lot of stuff is fascinating.
School culture isn't limited to the school itself. It's the culture that the Board of Education creates and supports, and it's also the culture that our communities support. So they all play a role in making sure that we are have that understanding and support for all of our students.
Excellent. So we've talked about the future for CABE. We've talked about some of the more aspirational things, but before we go, we want to talk a little bit about the recent past. The legislative session just ended. The budget passed. Was there any successes that you saw, or any failures? Something you would have liked to have seen that got shot down.
It was definitely a success that the legislature supported the continuation of the education cost-sharing grant phase-in that had been
Mm-hmm.
agreed to as a bipartisan agreement several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was definitely something that obviously boards of education and municipalities
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to rely on. So that was a very positive commitment by the legislature.
Yeah.
They also supported the minority teacher recruitment and retention, and particularly the residency program
Mm-hmm.
efforts. So again, recognizing that there is a role for the legislature in that,
Mm-hmm.
and that the importance of that to all of our students. And the other thing I'd point to is there is an ongoing effort, again supported by the legislature, for the State Department of Education to develop a model curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
and that would be available to school districts. They would not be required. It's not a statewide
Okay.
curriculum. It's not a mandate, but it gives districts the opportunity to draw on work of real experts without
Mm-hmm.
having to reinvent the wheel in each individual district. So they can take the best from what's been developed at the state level, they can
Mm-hmm.
tailor it to their local community, and that's going to be a tremendous resource for our districts.
So currently there isn't anything like that.
There are pieces, but it's not a comprehensive
Sort of
K-8
unified.
curriculum, right?
Interesting. A little earlier, you mentioned some of the federal funds that boards of eds are looking at right now. Is that mostly the ARP, the American Rescue Plan? Some of those
Yes.
one time. And have you come up with any sort of recommendations or anything for the best way for school districts to kind of handle that one time infusion? How to use it wisely.
Well, the good news is, while it is a one-time infusion, there is a multiple year period over which those funds can be expended. So they
Okay.
have to be committed by 2024. So
Mm-hmm.
districts are looking at multi-year plans, both in terms of the facilities improvements,
Mm-hmm.
as well as programs designed to support students coming out of this very unusual academic 16-month journey.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they also are looking to see what are some of the strategies that they will be able to use with those resources, and then how can they incorporate those strategies going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it will help them, in some cases, make the case for, we do need to support additional resources in this area because it made a tremendous difference for our students. So it's going to
Yeah.
give districts the opportunity to undertake some initiatives that they would not otherwise have the resources for, and hopefully be able to have a track record of success.
So an opportunity to maybe try some things that they might not have been able to get funded before, but now they have it. They could try these things, see if they work, and get some new ideas out of it.
Exactly.
Well, that sounds like an interesting way to go with that. We might as well take the silver linings where we can out of this whole experience.
That's very true. We certainly have seen the incredible collaboration that has taken place from the state level down to local communities in order to try and best serve our students and their families. And I think that truly is a silver lining.
I agree. Well, Patrice McCarthy, thanks so much for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
We'd like to thank our guest, Patrice McCarthy. I'd like to thank our premier sponsors, Digital Back Office, Palo Alto Networks, which you can check out at digitalbackoffice.com and paloaltonetworks.com. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Kevin Maloney is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Harry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.